I did not buy that ranch looking for trouble. Trouble found me in a white envelope with a red stamp that said final notice. The problem was I was not even supposed to be in an HOA in the first place. At least that is what I believed when I signed the papers and walked away from my old life in Dallas. My name is Caleb Morgan, and for 23 years I worked logistics, shipping schedules, warehouse systems, meetings about meetings, the kind of life where your whole day disappears into spreadsheets and fluorescent lighting and nobody ever actually looks happy to be there. I was burned out in a way I did not even know how to explain anymore. Just this constant pressure behind my eyes like I had been holding my breath for a decade. So when I found a 110-acre ranch outside a quiet stretch of Arizona they called Juniper Flats, I did not hesitate. Old house, rusted windmill, broken fences, nothing fancy, nothing polished, just land and silence. My dog Ranger rode shotgun that first night, and I remember thinking this is it. This is what a life is supposed to feel like when nobody is asking you for anything every 5 minutes. For the first few months, it actually worked. I fixed fences, learned how to deal with irrigation lines that seemed designed to break on purpose, and spent evenings sitting on the porch watching the sky turn colors you forget exist when you live in a city. Ranger would chase anything that moved and come back covered in dust like he had won some private war out there. Then the letter arrived. It was from something called the Juniper Ridge Property Alliance, demanding $640 in unpaid dues and late penalties, and warning that if I did not pay within 30 days, they could place a lien on my property. I read it 3 times standing in my kitchen before I even moved. The strange part was not just the demand, it was the confidence, like they already assumed I knew exactly who they were. But I did not, and I was almost certain I was not in any HOA. That had been one of the selling points. I called my attorney, Sarah Whitcomb, a woman who had handled my closing and had the kind of voice that made you feel like you were already slightly wrong about everything. I asked her one simple question, am I in an HOA? And I could hear her typing before she even answered. No, she said absolutely not. I went through every recorded restriction tied to that parcel. There is nothing that establishes mandatory membership in anything like that. So I read her the letter. There was a pause. Then she said something I did not expect. This is either a bluff or someone trying very hard to look official without having anything to stand on. That should have been the end of it. Just a scam letter, something to ignore. But something about it stuck in my head. The way it was written, the way it sounded like authority, even when it never actually proved it. So I did something that probably changed everything. I wrote back. I asked them, very politely, to provide any recorded covenant, deed restriction, or legal document that gave them authority over my property. I included parcel numbers, kept it clean, almost respectful. The kind of polite that makes unreasonable people uncomfortable. Then I sent it certified mail, and I waited. For a while, nothing happened. Life went back to fences and wind and quiet nights on the porch. I almost forgot about it, until the second envelope arrived. And this one was thicker. The second envelope did not feel like a mistake anymore. It felt like a response from something that had been doing this for a long time and was not used to being questioned. Inside was a 3-page letter from a man named Victor Hale, president of the Juniper Ridge Property Alliance. And from the very first paragraph, I could tell exactly what kind of person I was dealing with. The kind who believes volume replaces proof and confidence replaces law. He never answered my question, not once. Instead, he talked about shared roads, community responsibility, long-standing expectations, mutual benefit, all the phrases people use when they're trying to build a structure out of language instead of law. He wrote like if he repeated the idea of authority enough times, it would eventually become real. And then near the end came the line that changed the temperature of everything. If voluntary compliance is not achieved, the Alliance will pursue all remedies available under state law. Voluntary compliance. I actually laughed when I read it, because nothing about that letter was voluntary. It was dressed up pressure trying to sound polite. That is when I called Sarah again. She read it quietly, then said, Caleb, this is interesting in a very specific way. They are threatening enforcement actions without citing a single recorded instrument that gives them standing, meaning they're either bluffing or they are counting on nobody asking the right questions. And that was the part that stayed with me, because I realized how often that actually works. Most people do not ask for proof. They see letterhead, legal tone, and assume someone else already verified it. Sarah told me to respond again. Same approach, same request, but this time to explicitly ask for the recorded governing documents and any filing with the county. So I did. And while I waited, life in Juniper Flats kept moving. Ranger got sprayed by something I never fully identified and spent 2 days refusing to enter the house. I met a neighbor named Harold Vance who showed up uninvited, leaned on my fence, and told me my irrigation system was backward without even asking my name first. And honestly, he was right. Then I went into town, a place so small it only had one diner called Molly's Corner, where everybody pretends not to listen but absolutely listens to everything. The moment I mentioned Juniper Ridge Property Alliance, I noticed something subtle. Forks slowed down, conversations paused just a little too long. I shifted away. Nobody explained it, but they did not need to. 3 days later, I got a letter from an attorney named Graham Cole, and that is when things escalated in a different direction. This one was more formal, more polished, and also somehow more insecure underneath it. It introduced something called implied community obligations arising from long-term land benefit participation. That is not a legal phrase, that is a dressed-up assumption. But at the bottom was the real message. Failure to resolve this matter may result in adverse action affecting title status. That was the first time I felt something shift from annoyance to something sharper, because I was no longer just dealing with a mistake. I was dealing with a system that expected obedience without verification. Sarah read it and did not hesitate this time. Okay, she said, now we respond differently. She drafted the next letter herself. No emotion, no softness, just precise language demanding recorded authority, formal registration, and notice of legal basis for all claims. She also added something I did not fully understand at the time, a mention of slander of title under state law. When she finished, she said this is where they either step back or reveal what they actually are. We did not wait long, because 2 days later, my phone rang. And when I answered, the man on the other end said, "Mr. Morgan, this is Victor Hale." His voice was calm, controlled, practiced, the voice of someone who believed he still had the upper hand. And for the first time, I realized this was no longer about a letter. This was about a system that had been operating without being questioned for a very long time. And I was the first interruption it had encountered in years. Victor Hale did not sound like a man who expected resistance. He sounded like a man trying to gently guide reality back into place. "Mr. Morgan," he said, "I think we may have started off on the wrong foot here." I remember leaning against my kitchen counter, looking out at the land through the window. Ranger lying on the floor, still acting like the world outside had personally offended him. "No," I said, "I did not think we did. I think I asked for proof, and your organization sent threats instead." There was a pause on the line, just long enough to feel intentional. "You are benefiting from infrastructure maintained by this community for decades," he said carefully. "Then charge voluntary dues," I replied. "We cannot operate that way," he said. And that was it. The first honest sentence I had heard from him. Not legal justification, not covenant, not authority. Just we cannot operate that way. Which really meant the system only works if people do not ask questions. Over the next week, things escalated quietly but deliberately. Another letter arrived, this time from Graham Cole again, but sharper. It suggested potential impacts on title status, implied legal consequences, and referenced obligations that still did not exist in any recorded document I had seen. It was like watching someone stack smoke and call it a wall. At the same time, something else was happening in town. People were watching me, not in an aggressive way, more like they were trying to figure out which category I belonged to. Troublemaker, outsider, or someone about to get crushed like the others who never pushed back. One afternoon, I met an older rancher named Elias Boone. He showed up at my gate without warning, like people out here sometimes do, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had lived long enough to stop being impressed by authority. "You the guy asking questions about Juniper Ridge," he said. "I guess so." He nodded like that confirmed something he already suspected. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. We sat on the porch for nearly 2 hours. He did not rush anything, just looked out at the land like he was remembering a version of it that no longer existed. "The thing you're dealing with," he finally said, "it started different. Years ago, it was just neighbors sharing road work, fixing washouts, helping each other out. Nobody made it official because nobody needed to. So what changed?" I asked. He smiled, but it was not a happy smile. People changed. Land got expensive. New folks came in. And then Victor showed up. That name landed heavier than expected. He said Victor is not wrong about everything, Elias added. The roads do need upkeep. The problem is he thinks agreement and authority are the same thing. That line stayed with me, because that was exactly it. Somewhere along the way, someone had taken cooperation and turned it into enforcement. And the worst part was it almost worked, because most people do not fight back when something looks official enough. That night, I could not sleep. Not because I was scared of losing the ranch, I was not, but because I kept thinking about how many people might have already paid without ever knowing they had a choice. The next morning I called Sarah and told her I wanted everything. Every filing, every record, every history tied to Juniper Ridge. There was silence on the line. Then she said, "Okay, now you are not just responding, you are investigating." And that is exactly what it became. Within days, my dining table stopped looking like a home and started looking like a case file. County records, old property plats, corporate registrations, printed emails, handwritten notes. Ranger started sleeping under the table like he understood the mood of the house had changed. And what we found did not take long to unravel everything. Juniper Ridge Property Alliance was not properly registered as an active governing body anymore. Their filings were outdated. Their authority was inconsistent at best, and in most cases completely absent from recorded land restrictions. There was no unified covenant binding most of the properties they were billing. None. Just scattered historical references to cooperative maintenance from decades ago that had never been formalized into enforceable structure. And then came the part that made everything heavier. We started contacting people. A retired couple said they had been paying for years because they thought it was mandatory. A widow admitted she stopped questioning it after the first threatening letter because it sounded too official to ignore. Another man said he paid because he did not want trouble, not because he believed it was right. Nobody had challenged it, so it had just continued. Sarah finally looked at me one evening and said, "If this goes where I think it is going, this is going to tear that community in half." "I know," I said. "Do you still want to push it?" she asked. I thought about it for a long time. About silence being mistaken for consent. About authority that only exists because nobody asks where it comes from. "Yeah," I said finally. "I do." The breaking point came when they called a community meeting. I was not even officially a member, but I showed up anyway with Sarah. The hall was packed in a way that felt uncomfortable, like everyone knew something important was about to collapse, but nobody knew which direction it would fall. Victor Hale stood at the front, calm, controlled, speaking about responsibility, shared infrastructure, community fairness. And if you did not know the background, it almost sounded reasonable. That is what made it dangerous, because the truth and the performance looked almost identical until you asked for proof. When I stood up and asked for recorded legal authority, the room changed instantly. Sarah followed immediately, cutting through the language, asking for documentation, not interpretation. And for the first time, Victor did not have an immediate answer. He talked around it, tried to reframe it, tried fairness, tried history, tried everything except what we asked for. Then someone from the back, an older rancher, simply asked, "Do we actually have legal authority or not?" And the silence that followed said everything. Because everyone in that room realized at the same time that the answer had never actually been given. The meeting ended differently than anyone expected. No shouting, no collapse, just a quiet restructuring of reality. The Alliance agreed to suspend all enforcement actions pending legal review. Victor stepped down weeks later, quietly, like a man leaving a room he no longer recognized as his. And over time, something unexpected happened. People stayed, not because they were forced, but because once everything became transparent, cooperation made sense again. Real cooperation. The kind built on choice, not pressure. Months later, I signed up too. Not because I had to, because by then I actually knew my neighbors by name. And sometimes I still think about how close it all came to just being another quiet system nobody questioned. That is the part that sticks with me the most. How many things in life look like authority, sound like authority, even feel like authority, until someone asks the one question nobody wanted to answer? If you were in my place, would you have pushed it that far, knowing what it might do to the people around you? Or would you have just paid and moved on to keep the peace? I still do not know if there's a clean answer to that. But I do know this. Some systems only exist because nobody stops long enough to ask if they are real.